Good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining us from Israel and the United States. We are happy that so many of you are joining us on Zoom and live on our Facebook page. We have with us almost 200 participants, among them Israeli higher education officials, faculty members from universities and colleges, Fulbright fellows, and colleagues from other exchange programs and foundations. We will start with an English session with a guest speaker, Allan Goodman, president of IIE, moderated by Shira, Ruderman, chair of the board of the Fulbright Commission in Israel. At 5:30, we'll move on to a discussion in Hebrew on the Israeli angle. We ask that you write your questions in the chat option on the bottom of your screen. We'll try to address these questions. The event is accessible and there are closed captions for those in need. In the calendar invite that you received, there is an online interactive survey. The link can be found on the chat as well. We invite you to take a minute and answer the questions, and we may be able to address them later. I'm now happy to invite Shira Ruderman to chair the first session.
Thank you, Anat. Thank you all for joining this important conversation. We do not take it for granted, understanding that all of us spending a lot of time in Zoom these days. For the last few months, we are facing one of the most challenging semesters in the history of academia, and we have very little insight on the shape of the academic system in general, and more particularly for this coming year. Here at the Fulbright, we take our unique role and our challenges very seriously. Our mission since the founding of the Commission in 1956 has been twofold: to promote excellence and exchange of knowledge between the U.S. and Israel, while constantly searching for and discussing solutions are relevant to local and global needs. This is why we at Fulbright Israel decided to host this event to discuss the influence of the COVID-19 crisis on higher education. Nelson Mandela once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And we in Fulbright do want to change the world together. Let me begin by expressing my sincere hope is that the collective effort demonstrated in this crisis by students, academic heads, administration, and others will continue to sustain us in the months ahead. I want to thank the staff at Fulbright Israel for organizing this event, headed by Dr. Anat Lapidot, for bringing together the global and more local perspective of these challenges. I'm now delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Allan E. Goodman. Dr. Goodman is the president of the Institute of International Education. The Institute promotes the exchange of scholars and students, conduct research on international academic mobility, and administrates many international programs. The most famous one is Fulbright. Dr. Goodman is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, a founding member of the World Innovation Summit for Education, and serves on the Council for Higher Education Advisory Council. He has a PhD in government from Harvard, an MPA from the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and he is the recipient of honorary degrees from many universities. We are happy and honored that you took the time to have this conversation with us today. So with no further ado, Dr. Goodman, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Shira and Anat, for your very strong leadership of this distinguished Fulbright program that brings America and Israel closer, always closer together. And it's a privilege for all of my colleagues to serve your commission in making the best placements and the best possible programs for your Fulbright students and scholars. So thank you very much for having me and for this longstanding partnership. And our topic, this won't be the last time we probably have a webinar or Zoom class on when pandemics end, because it's a very complex topic. also for all of us, unfortunately, in the field of international educational exchange, it's a very familiar topic. This is actually IIE's 12th pandemic. We were founded right in the middle in 1919 of the Spanish influenza pandemic, which started in 1918 and wasn't declared over until 1920. And what I want to try to do is, because this is a familiar experience for those of us in educational exchange, is offer just a few observations to get us started so we can have as many questions as you can possibly take. And let me share three of them to begin with. First, most pandemics end. Not all pandemics end. We are in the 44th year of the HIV/AIDS pandemic. We are in the 8th year of the Middle East respiratory syndrome pandemic. And it took smallpox hundreds of years to actually be eradicated. When I showed up as a graduate student at Harvard, there were two requirements that every new student coming to Harvard had to demonstrate. One is that they had to jump in the swimming pool in the gymnasium and prove that they could swim. This was because the gift of the Widener Library was made by the family of a young man who graduated from Harvard but drowned in the sinking of the Titanic. And they believed if every student at Harvard, if he had known how to swim, he might have survived, and they made it possible for every student at Harvard to, and it still may be a requirement today. And some of our colleagues on the Zoom this morning may remember the other document you had to come was with proof that you had a smallpox inoculation. And so Harvard led the way in the early 1700s, urging people to get an inoculation when there was a smallpox outbreak in the city of Boston that killed half of the population of Boston. I think it was in 1721. And from that period onward, every Harvard student had to come and prove that they had been inoculated against the disease, but it took almost 200 years to eradicate it. So pandemics end, some take a lot longer, most end through a vaccine, and some we've not discovered yet a vaccine, but in the case of HIV, we have discovered a way to treat the disease itself. So we're only at the beginning of guessing when this pandemic will end, but we know it will end. Shira mentioned that education is so important. It'll probably be an Israeli Fulbrighter working in a lab in New York City that discovers how to either cure this pandemic or how to make the vaccine that will protect us all. And another lesson from all of the pandemics that we've lived through is an exchange organization is that science saves us. And international education, international science is part of what will save us in this case. The second observation I'd share, we tend to forget this thinking about as societies recover from pandemics. When they end, one of the first industries to recover is academic exchanges. They tend to recover more rapidly than other industries or activities, and they also grow. So I look back at all of our annual reports starting with 1920 and looked at the reports for the first year or two after each of the 11 other pandemics ended. And what's striking is two things. One, none of the reports mention the pandemic. What they mention is a growth in international student enrollment coming to the United States, a growth in Americans studying abroad, and sometimes rather substantial growth in enrollments and study abroad in both cases. So I think our activity in international exchanges, Fulbright, is more resilient than maybe many other industries or activities or professions in the wake of a pandemic. And I think we should take great hope and great optimism from that. I also believe that when this pandemic ends, so many people would have put their educational plans on hold or deferred study abroad or deferred going abroad, that not only will exchanges resume rapidly, but they will also grow much more substantially than we can even estimate now. If the dream is deferred for a semester, there'll be one level of growth. If it's deferred for a year, it'll be another level of growth. But for sure, I believe that international education is both resilient and will come out of this stronger. Third observation is that this pandemic may be really a singular occurrence in our world of international educational exchange. It seems to have leveled the playing field between all of the leading destination countries, whether it's China, the UK, America. All countries had the pandemic. All countries are having a resurgence. All countries had to suspend air service. All countries had to close their consulates. All countries had to have some degree of lockdown, shelter in place, where international students had to remain where they were and couldn't go home for the summer. So it's not like other crises where there's a crisis in terrorist event in Europe and people say, well, maybe it's not safe to go to Europe, I'll go to Australia instead, or I'll come to America. Or there's an event in America and people say, well, maybe I'll go to Canada instead. It's not like that. It's not as though there are three other options for people to travel and study abroad in this research and academic ecosystem. Everybody's on pause. So the level, the playing field is level for the first time. There's not a wait to one continent or another. There's not one consulate that's open that's saying visas are more easy if you come to my country. Secondly, we face a very complicated fall. We're tracking which universities in America will be open, will be closed, will be hybrid, will be partly this, partly that. There are 15 different scenarios now of how a university could be open based on what universities have so far announced. So there's a very complex set of models for how the fall term will begin. We all know when the fall term starts. In some universities, it starts by the second or third week of August, some the first week of September. Between today and the middle of August, maybe those 15 scenarios will be all changed. And maybe universities that says we're going to be fully open will only be partly open. Maybe others that are going to be virtual can figure out that, well, maybe there's a way to have some on-campus experience. So we're right in the middle of all of the complexity that the fall involves. We're also, our university system, at least in America, is very decentralized. So each university is making its own decision about how open to be, what will be safe, but they're also guided by the local authorities of the city or county in which they exist. So we may have national guidelines, we have state guidelines, we will certainly have local city, municipal, county guidelines. And all of those could change between now and the 14th or 15th of August, or the fourth week of August, or the first week of September, depending on how the disease proceeds. So I think ahead for us is a period of great uncertainty, great complexity, with everybody trying to make sure that some form of university education and international education remains open. Now, everyone finally would hope that that an Israeli scientist working with an American scientist would discover a vaccine. And we would then be able to enter a post-COVID-19 normal. But it might be 6 months from now, it might be 9 months from now, it might be 18 months from now. But what I'm sure of is when it is safe to travel, when there is a vaccine that's protecting us all, just as in the previous 11 pandemics, international education exchange will resume rapidly, and grow substantially. So thank you very much for the chance to offer these observations and for convening us at a very important moment.
Thank you so much. Fascinating and important. And I'm sure there are many questions to ask you, and I'll start. Some of them are in front of us, and we'll start. And we'll remind, as Anat said, if anyone has other questions, please make sure that you send this to us by chat. So we all wish to return to campus life as soon as possible. However, we cannot predict when that moment will arrive, as you just said. What kind of steps must be taken to ensure the continuation of high quality research and teaching till we are safe to go back to in-person model?
Well, I think thank you very much for the question. It's a good one. It's on the minds of so many scientists and researchers. And I think we have been fortunate, in a sense, to have been forced to pivot all of our research so quickly in the very middle of the spring semester. And we have discovered what works about Zoom, what works about webinars, what works about GoToMeetings, what experiments can be done by setting up 2 parallel labs and doing the same step and watching each other on video. And we've learned what our capacities are. We've learned we have to know how to use these devices. We've learned what works. So, for example, I've learned that the best time to do a Zoom conference from Washington, D.C. is Monday morning. And the worst time is Thursday and Friday because the devices are exhausted, the neighborhood is filled with people using, and so we need an alternate way of doing things. So I think this is teaching us how to continue to do the research, how to continue to, if we have to have 2 parallel labs, to set them up so that we can do the same experiments and watch each other doing it in ways that we were perhaps reluctant to, in ways that we were not sure might work, but we were forced to learn quickly, and I think that is a blessing in a sense, because we know if this is prolonged, what we can maintain, what we can't maintain, what we have to postpone, what we can do in parallel experiments, and it's teaching us a lot.
So if I continue from there, in one hand, as you said, we learned from this experience so far, and it seems that social distancing methods will be with us for some time ahead, or even if it ends, it will have its impact by learning social distancing so far on our behavior. Is this something that has pulled us faster than we planned into the future of how higher education and higher education institution looks like? What is the consequences of such a shift on the campus and on exchange programs in general?
I would be surprised 3 years from now, with the discovery of a vaccine, that we would still be practicing social distancing and have social distancing on campuses. I think the impulse to return to a campus, to return to a seminar room, to return to a co-curricular or extracurricular activity, to be among colleagues and friends is something universal across higher education, not only in my country and yours, but around the world. So I think with a vaccine, we will return to more customary campus life. We will have also figured out what parts of online learning and distance education and hybrid education do we want to retain? What seems to work very well? You and I were talking earlier about the impact on our school children and phased entry back into school. We'll know an awful lot more about what makes for good learning, what makes for bad learning, going through these next months. So I think we'll learn a lot about how to teach better, how to do research better, but the core of that activity will still be a campus, a laboratory, a classroom, a seminar room. And for many of us, the biggest fear in international educational exchange was everything will be virtual. We'll have holograms of ourselves in different time zones, and we really won't need to go someplace else. We really don't need to be sitting next to you in the classroom. In fact, what we discovered is we very much need that. You can't do it all on a device. You can't have mutual understanding without actually being, living, eating, breathing in somebody else's culture, playing their music, dancing to it. And yes, you can dance on a screen, and you can have virtual dance parties, TikTok parties, but it is not the same as having a hora at a kibbutz and realizing that there are many things which unite us all. So I think we're going to come out of this valuing the university more than we went into it, and not overvaluing our reliance on technology.
I'll ask one question, and in the same time say to the panelists, prepare yourself to ask a question as well if you wish. All you need to do is just to either raise hand or unmute so we'll know. I'll present the last question from our conversation to you, Dr. Allan, and then one of the panelists will present a question as well. But everyone here, at least in the US, talking about the anxiety and the mental health rise on campuses before COVID for many other reasons like financial stress and many, I think, finding that some of us are familiar, and now due to COVID, the numbers are just rising. And I'm interested to ask you, is this challenge brought this issue of well-being and mental health to the forefront of the higher ed committee or to the presidents of the universities? And if so, do you expect a change so we as a system can reduce stress, depression, anxiety on our campuses and make the experience of learning more relaxed and pleasant?
Even before the crisis, every president that I would talk with, whether we started with the subject of research or Fulbright or international educational exchange generally, we would get to mental health issues on campus. I think all of our campuses have an obligation not only to have a student health service, but to have a public health and mental health outlook because of all the anxieties and stresses you mentioned. Give me a vaccine for COVID-19, and we will reduce one of the biggest, newest elements of stress. People are worried about social interaction. They're worried about their health. They're worried about their parents. So coming out of this crisis, we will have, I think, less anxiety. But going into it, we also had a realization on many campuses and around the world that public health and student mental health is as important as how many labs you have, how many courses in economics you have, how many faculty you have in ratio to your students. So I think we will learn how to reduce stress through this. But now is a very stressful time. My grandchildren and your children, they are sick of Zoom school. They've had enough of it. They are, thank God, sick of their devices. They're not so anxious to be on the machines all the time because they had to do their schoolwork, and they know that it wasn't a substitute for human school. So I think getting over this And I do believe science will save us. Getting over this with the vaccine will reduce a lot of stress in all of our societies.
Thank you. In a couple moments, I'm going to turn the stage to Anat and our panelists from Israel. And I want to close by saying thank you for not just being here today, but being there with us during this, not just pandemic time, in the relationship. And Fulbright is a flag, not just flag program, but a flag relationship between the two states and the academic aspect, but beyond. And I think that without trust and mutual conversations and communication, we could not have successful 50 years together. We hope that we'll have many more. And I hope that some of the issues that we raised here will be discussed by coming up with more hybrid models and flexible solutions to make the academic life and the experience more relevant and up to date. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I will turn it to Anat.
Thank you.